She arrived at the range just before dawn, the sky a soft wash of pale colors that promised the heat of the day ahead. Her boots crunched lightly on the gravel path as she made her way to the firing line, a place she had come to know well, yet today felt different. The morning air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs and steady her nerves. The targets lay, scattered downrange, some worn, others fresh replacements, and it was her job to make sure each one was perfectly aligned so the shooters could practice their aim without distraction. Her hands moved methodically over the mechanisms, adjusting height, angle, and distance as her eyes flicked constantly between her work and the horizon. Beyond the range, the mountains stood dark and imposing, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like silent sentinels. She remembered how many times she had trained in these very spots, pushing her limits, facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. But today, there was a restless energy inside her, something unspoken that she couldn't quite name. The usual rhythm of her task was disrupted by a strange anticipation that made her pulse quicken and her senses sharpen. She glanced over her shoulder out of habit, scanning for anyone else on the range, but the area was deserted except for the scattered equipment and the soft hum of insects beginning their day. The sun slowly rose higher, casting long shadows that stretched across the earth like fingers reaching out to touch her. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. Although the morning was cool, the exertion of her work brought warmth. Her mind wandered, for a moment, to the stories she had heard about the elite warriors who passed through here, men and women who carried the weight of impossible missions on their shoulders. Those stories were filled with danger, sacrifice, and triumph tales told in whispers around campfires and mess halls, but she never imagined she would cross paths with one of them, not today at least. Her focus snapped back to the task at hand as she adjusted another target, a small metal plate designed to flip when hit. She tested it several times, watching it spring back into place with a satisfying click. Each detail mattered. Every small adjustment had a purpose, and she took pride in doing the job right. Yet beneath that pride lay a quiet hunger, a drive to prove herself beyond the routine of maintenance and preparation. She wanted to be more than just the person who set targets. She wanted to be the one who made every shot count, who could hold her own in the heat of battle. The sound of footsteps made her turn quickly, expecting a teammate or another range officer. Instead, a figure stepped out from behind a cluster of trees. A man, tall and strong, wearing the unmistakable gear of a Navy SEAL. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stopped her breath for a moment. He approached without a word, the weight of his presence filling the space between them. The rifle he carried was sleek and battle-worn, a weapon that had seen countless missions and come through unscathed. He held it out, to her as if offering a key to a secret world, a challenge she could not refuse. The moment stretched thin as she stared down at the rifle, then back up into his steady gaze. She felt the weight of expectation pressing down, yet also a surge of possibility rising inside. She reached out her hands slowly, taking the weapon, feeling its cold metal against her palms. The grip fit perfectly, her fingers wrapping around it like it had always belonged there. A quiet calm settled over her nerves, the storm inside, beginning to quiet as focus took its place. She nodded once, the smallest movement, but enough to show she accepted the challenge. The SEAL stepped back, blending into the shadows as silently as he had appeared, leaving her alone on the line with the rifle and the impossible shot waiting for her downrange. She lifted the weapon carefully, bringing it to her shoulder, the world narrowing to the scope. The target, the moment, the day had changed now. Nothing would ever be the same again. She stood frozen for a moment, her breath shallow and steady, her eyes locked on the rifle in her hands, a weapon she had admired from afar, yet never dared to touch before. The seal had vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind a silence, thick with unspoken challenge and endless possibility. Around her, the range seemed to hold its breath too, as if time itself waited for what would come next. Her fingers tightened around the grip, feeling the cold, hard steel beneath her skin. A reminder of the power contained within this instrument of precision and destruction. She lifted the rifle slowly, its weight unfamiliar, yet comforting the balance perfect as if it had been made for her hands. The scope glinted in the early light, and she brought it up to her eye, instinctively adjusting the focus until the distant target sharpened into view. The target was unlike the usual ones she adjusted. It was a tiny speck far beyond the standard range, a challenge set by the seal himself, a test reserved for the best and the bravest. She swallowed hard. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, filling her senses with the rawness of nature around her. The silence was broken by a distant call, a reminder that others were watching, waiting to see if she could rise to the impossible task. The muscles in her arms tensed as she settled into position, feet planted firmly, grounding her to the earth. Her mind raced through every lesson, learned every hour, spent honing skills that many said she lacked the talent for. But talent was only part of the equation. Grit, determination, and sheer willpower mattered more in moments like these. She closed one eye, letting the other line up the crosshairs. A tiny, red dot aimed precisely where she wanted the bullet to land. Her heart pounded louder than the distant hum of insects, the sweat on her brow cooling as adrenaline surged through her veins. The wind shifted subtly, and she adjusted her aim, calculating trajectory, speed, and drop with the practiced eye of a marksman. But this was more than practice. This was proving something to herself and everyone watching from the shadows. She took a deep breath, held it steady, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked sharp and clean, echoing through the valley like a gunshot in the stillness. The bullet flew invisible, slicing through the air, defying odds and distance. The seconds stretched impossibly long as every eye tracked the flight of the projectile. The target seemed impossibly small, too far away for a normal shot, yet there it was, waiting for fate to decide. The world narrowed down to that tiny point of impact where skill, luck, and courage collided. She saw a small puff of dust, a subtle but undeniable sign the bullet had found its mark. The crowd that had gathered silently erupted into whispers, gasps, and quiet cheers. Disbelief painted across faces as they realized what had just happened. The seal emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable for a moment, then a rare smile cracked across his face, a silent nod of respect and acknowledgement for the woman who had just accomplished the impossible. She lowered the rifle slowly, the weight now a symbol not of doubt, but of victory. The impossible shot had been made, and with it her place among those who dared to defy limits and rewrite expectations. The day that began like any other had transformed into a moment forever etched in memory, a testament to the power of focused courage and the unyielding human spirit. As she stood alone again, the range now buzzing with renewed energy, she felt a fire ignite inside, a promise to herself that this was only the beginning, and that no challenge, no matter how impossible, would ever hold her back again. She stood alone on the firing line, the rifle still resting heavy in her hands, her chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. The crowd slowly dispersed, their murmurs fading into the background, but the echoes of that impossible shot lingered in the air like a whispered legend just born. The sun climbed higher, warming her skin and casting long shadows over the targets she had adjusted earlier today, seemed like a distant memory, replaced now by the weight of what she had just achieved. Her thoughts raced through every step that had brought her here, years of training, early mornings, endless drills, and countless moments of doubt that nearly made her give up, yet she had pressed on, fueled by a relentless desire to prove that skill could outshine skepticism. She lowered the rifle and ran her fingers along the barrel, feeling a connection to something greater than herself. The weapon was more than steel and mechanics. It was a symbol of trust, the faith of a warrior, who had handed her the key to a hidden world, one she was determined to master. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Breaking the silence, she pulled it out to see a message from the seal. Simply 3 words: "You proved yourself." She smiled to herself, the weight of those words heavier than any rifle. She glanced around the range, now bustling with renewed energy. Some faces still turned her way, filled with admiration and disbelief, but others with quiet envy. The path she had chosen was not an easy one, not for someone who had to fight twice as hard to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted. But today she had broken through barriers, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't. She packed up her gear, slowly savoring the moment before the seal approached again, his presence steady and reassuring. This time he spoke softly, his voice low but firm, telling her about missions past impossible odds, and how the rifle she held had been a part of victories and losses alike. The stories painted a picture of sacrifice and honor that deepened her respect for the weapon and the man who trusted her with it. She listened intently, absorbing every word, knowing that this was more than just training. This was a rite of passage, a calling to rise higher than she ever dreamed. The seal looked at her with a challenge in his eyes, inviting her to step beyond the role of observer to become a warrior in her own right. The decision settled in her bones, a mix of fear, excitement, and determination. The world outside the range would never be the same once she crossed that line. Once she accepted the mantle, she would carry the weight of expectations and the price of battle, but she was ready to face it all. Her mind flickered to the faces of those who doubted her, the sneers and whispered questions about her place in this world. She clenched her fists, knowing that every shot, every sacrifice would be a testament to her strength and resolve. The range faded into the background as she imagined what lay ahead. Missions in hostile territory, the roar of gunfire, the sting of cold rain, and the unbreakable bond forged only in the heat of combat. She pictured herself moving with precision, confidence, and courage, leading and protecting those who depended on her. Her training would be tested beyond anything she had ever faced, but the impossible shot had proven that she was capable of more than anyone had believed. The seal handed her a small card with coordinates and a time, a silent invitation to a next level of challenge and responsibility. Her heart raced with the promise of what was to come. The journey from target adjuster to warrior was just beginning, and she was ready to take the first step into the unknown with fire in her soul and steel in her hands. The next morning she rose before the first hint of dawn, the darkness around her thick and silent, the air cool enough to send a shiver down her spine. She dressed quickly in her range gear, her mind replaying the events of the previous day, the impossible. Shot the murmurs, the seals, approving nod, and the small card now tucked safely in her pocket. Every movement was deliberate, every step carrying her closer to a decision that could redefine her life. She left her quarters and stepped into the stillness of the early hour, the faint smell of dew and pine drifting on the wind. The coordinates burned in her mind as she followed the narrow dirt path that wound through the trees, each crunch of gravel underfoot sounding louder than it should in the quiet. The sun had not yet risen, but the eastern horizon glowed faintly with the promise of light. Her pulse quickened as she approached the meeting point, an open clearing where the air felt heavy with expectation. The seal was already there, standing. In the shadow of a tall pine, his stance relaxed, but his eyes sharp and watchful. He nodded once in acknowledgement, his expression giving nothing away, before turning toward a trail that led deeper into the woods. She followed without question each step, taking her farther from the familiar range and into territory that felt wild, untamed, and full of secrets. The ground was uneven roots twisting through the earth and branches reaching low to catch at her shoulders. The forest closed in around them, the light filtering through in narrow beams that danced with the shifting wind. After what felt like hours, they emerged into another clearing, this one larger and ringed with battered wooden posts and rusted metal targets scattered at odd distances. The ground was littered with spent shell casings, and the faint scent of gunpowder lingered in the air. This was no ordinary range. This was a place for those who trained beyond the limits, where every shot mattered and every mistake carried weight. The SEAL stopped and turned to her, his voice low but firm, telling her that today she would face more than distance or precision. She would face pressure, distractions, and the kind of obstacles that stripped away comfort and exposed the truth of a marksman. He set a rifle in her hands, not the same one from before, but heavier, longer built for extreme range. The scope was clear and sharp, but the targets he pointed out were barely visible against the distant tree line, some marked with faint glints of sunlight, others hidden entirely. Her task was simple in words but daunting in reality: hit every target in sequence without missing, under time pressure. Her heart pounded in her ears as she dropped to one knee, bracing the rifle against her shoulder. The SEAL started the timer without warning, forcing her into immediate focus. She found the first target and squeezed off a shot, the recoil punching into her shoulder, the metal plate flipping back with a satisfying clang. She moved to the second, adjusting for wind and slope, firing again, the echo ringing out across the clearing. The third was harder hidden behind a low rise, and she had to shift position, dragging her elbows through dirt and leaves, her breathing steady, despite the rush in her blood. She hit it on the second try, cursing herself for the delay but pushing forward. The SEAL watched without expression, his eyes tracking every move, every correction, every sign of hesitation. By the halfway point, sweat streaked. Her face and her arms ached from holding the rifle steady, but she refused to slow. Her movements were sharper now, her breathing more controlled. Each shot a deliberate choice. The last target was almost invisible, a sliver of metal tucked between two narrow trees at the far edge of the clearing. She adjusted her scope, felt the wind tug against her cheek, and counted her heartbeat before squeezing the trigger. The shot rang out, and the target flipped backward, disappearing from sight. She lowered the rifle, her chest heaving, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the release of pure focus. The SEAL stepped forward, his face still unreadable. Then he gave the faintest nod, the same silent approval as before. But this time, there was something else in his eyes, recognition of a warrior in the making. She knew then that she had passed another test, but the weight of the journey ahead pressed in, reminding her that the path she had chosen would only grow harder from here. The air was still heavy with the scent of gunpowder as she stood in the clearing, the rifle hanging loosely in her grip, her shoulders aching from the relentless tension of the drill. The SEAL said nothing at first, only studied her with that piercing gaze that seemed to see far deeper than the surface. His silence was not meant to intimidate. It was a measure, a way to see if she would break under the weight of expectation. She met his stare without flinching, the heat of the afternoon sun pressing down on her back, the distant hum of insects buzzing in her ears. She could feel the fine layer of sweat on her skin, cooling slowly in the breeze, but her mind remained locked on the moment, the memory of that last shot still fresh and sharp. The SEAL finally spoke, his voice low and steady, telling her that skill with a rifle was only part of the equation, that there was another side to mastery, one that demanded endurance, awareness, and the ability to perform under chaos. He told her to follow him, and without hesitation, she fell into step beside him. The path twisted deeper into the forest, the canopy above thick enough to blot out most of the light and cast everything in a dim green haze. The air here was cooler, but carried the scent of damp soil and moss. The silence was broken only by the occasional snap of a twig beneath their boots, until they emerged onto a narrow ridge overlooking a steep drop. The seal pointed to a crude wooden platform on the far side, barely visible through the dense trees, and told her that would be her next firing position. She would need to move quickly through the terrain, reach the platform, and take the shot before her window of opportunity closed. He handed her a small pack heavier than she expected and told her to carry it the entire way, no matter what it contained. Her pulse quickened as she slung the pack over her shoulders, its weight biting into her muscles. She set off immediately, navigating the uneven ground, roots, and rocks, threatening to trip her with every step. The forest seemed to close in around her shadows, shifting in her peripheral vision, the sounds of movement somewhere beyond the trees. She pressed forward, ignoring the burn in her legs, each step deliberate. Each breath measured, the pack felt heavier with every stride, and her mind screamed at her to slow down, but she forced herself to keep pace. The ridge narrowed, and the drop to her right became steeper, the earth crumbling underfoot in places. She kept her eyes forward, the distant outline of the platform growing larger with every step. The seal's voice called out somewhere behind her, not with encouragement but with sharp commands, reminding her that hesitation could mean failure. She reached the platform and dropped to one knee, swinging the rifle into position. The target was already in sight, but moving slowly to the left, partially obscured by branches. She adjusted her aim, factoring in the movement, the wind, and her own rapid breathing. She squeezed the trigger, and the shot cracked across the forest, the target jerking sharply as the bullet struck home. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders for just a moment before the seal emerged from the trees, his boots silent on the earth. He gave another of those rare nods of approval, then told her that this was only the first step in building the instincts she would need in the field. Her performance today had shown she could adapt, think under pressure, and push past physical strain, but the true test would come when everything around her was unpredictable, when she had no time to prepare and no guarantee of success. She listened carefully, her mind already sharpening in anticipation of whatever lay ahead, knowing that each challenge was shaping her into something more than she had ever imagined. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, the shadows stretching long and thin across the ground like black fingers reaching for her boots. She stood on the platform, the rifle cooling in her hands, her breathing finally steady. Again, after the hard push through the ridge, the seal was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her as if weighing something important, before he turned and motioned for her to follow. She stepped off the platform and trailed behind him, the path twisting into unfamiliar territory, where the ground sloped unevenly and the air smelled faintly of smoke. The deeper they went, the more she noticed signs of recent activity, spent casings scattered near tree roots, blackened patches of earth, and broken branches, as if a struggle had passed through here. The seal stopped suddenly and raised a hand for silence. She froze, listening hard. And then she heard it, faint at first, but growing clearer, the sound of distant gunfire, sharp cracks echoing. Through the forest carried on the wind. The seal turned to her, his voice low and deliberate, telling her that the drill was over and the real test had just begun. He explained in a few short sentences that there was a live fire exercise underway. Beyond the ridge, involving multiple shooters, moving targets, and timed extractions, she would be stepping in without warning, without briefing, and without the safety net of controlled conditions. Her pulse surged, the words sinking into her like a weight on her chest. This was not the range. This was chaos wrapped in the sound of gunfire. He led her to a low rise, and they crouched behind it. The smell of gunpowder grew stronger now, mixed with the scent of churned earth and sweat peering over. The rise, she saw 3 figures moving fast between cover, each armed and firing at distant pop-up targets that appeared and vanished in seconds. The seal pointed to a narrow gap between 2 thick pines and told her to take the position there. From that angle, she would have less than a second to acquire and hit each target as it appeared. Her mind ran through calculations, even as her body moved low and fast across the ground until she slid into position. The rifle felt heavier. Now the air, electric with tension. Her eyes locked on the first flash of movement, and she squeezed the trigger, the recoil jolting through her shoulder. The target dropped, instantly replaced by another in the opposite direction. She pivoted sharply, firing again, the shot landing true. She felt time slip away into a blur of movement, aim, and fire, each second demanding total focus. Her arms burned, her lungs ached, but she did not break rhythm. Each target fell until the last one appeared far down range, barely visible through the trees. She steadied herself, blocking out everything but the tiny shape in her scope. The world narrowed, the forest sounds fading to nothing. She took the shot and watched the target fall. The clearing went still, the gunfire fading. Into the distance, the seal approached slowly, his expression unreadable, until the faintest smile crept across his face. He told her she had just passed a test that many failed not because of skill, but because of their inability to think under the crushing weight of urgency and chaos. She realized then that the impossible shot she had made the day before had only opened the door. This was the proving ground, the place where those who stepped through either rose to greatness or fell into obscurity. And as she slung the rifle over her shoulder and followed him back through the darkening forest, she knew she would not be the one to fall. The trail back through the forest felt longer this time, though the light was fading fast and the air had cooled into that stillness that comes just before nightfall. Her boots sank slightly into the damp soil with each step, the faint rustle of leaves overhead blending with the rhythmic sound of her breathing. She could feel the ache settling deep into her muscles, the kind of ache that spoke not just of physical strain, but of the mental weight of everything she had just faced. The seal walked ahead without hurry, his steps deliberate, his silence steady. She knew he was watching her even without looking back, judging her endurance, her focus, her ability to keep moving when fatigue threatened to slow her. The forest eventually gave way to a narrow dirt road, and ahead she could see the faint glow of campfires flickering in the distance. The closer they came, the clearer the shapes of other figures emerged, some seated on crates, cleaning weapons, others standing in small groups. Speaking in low voices, their eyes followed her as she entered the clearing, the weight of their attention heavy but not hostile. It was curiosity mixed with a quiet kind of respect. The seal led her to a table set with a map and a few scattered pieces of gear. He motioned for her to sit, and then began to speak in that calm, even tone that carried more authority than any raised voice. He told her that the events of the day were not about marksmanship alone, but about proving she could keep her head clear under unpredictable and shifting conditions. That she had done so meant she had the foundation needed for the next step, but the next step would not be easy. She listened intently, absorbing every word, knowing that whatever he was preparing her for would demand more than anything she had faced before he spoke of missions that had failed because hesitation had cost seconds, and of victories that had been won only because someone had been willing to act without doubt or fear. He told her that skill was worthless without the will to use it when it mattered most, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Then he unrolled the map and pointed to a location deep in unfamiliar territory. He explained that at first light she would be part of a small team moving into a simulated hostile zone designed to strip away comfort and routine. She would be forced to navigate unknown ground under constant pressure, making decisions in real time with no second chances. The camp grew quieter as he spoke, the crackle of the fire and the occasional distant call of a night bird. The only sounds. She studied the map, committing every contour and landmark to memory, feeling the gravity of what was coming. The seal finally stood and told her to rest, though his tone made it clear rest would be a relative term. She found a spot near the edge of the camp and sat with her back to a tree, the warmth of the fire brushing her face and the cool night air wrapping around her shoulders. Her thoughts drifted to the path that had brought her here, the countless hours spent alone on ranges, the times she had been overlooked or dismissed, the days she had wondered if any of it would ever matter. Now she knew it mattered more than she had realized. Every trial, every moment of doubt had been sharpening her for this very point. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the faint murmur of voices in the camp and the soft wind moving. Through the trees, tomorrow would bring the most demanding test yet, but the fire inside her burned steady and bright. She was ready, not because she had no fear, but because she had learned how to walk straight through it. The first light of dawn crept over the tree line, painting the camp in shades of pale gold and silver, the air crisp and filled with the smell of wood smoke. She rose without hesitation, her body still sore, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. The seal was already moving around the camp, quietly issuing instructions to the others, his presence steady and commanding. She approached the map table once more, where the coordinates from the night before were still marked in black ink. The mission would begin in less than 10 minutes. The camp was stirring with activity boots, thudding against the dirt. The metallic clink of magazines being loaded, the quiet murmur of final checks and whispered words. The small team assembled around the seal, their faces set with focus, their eyes briefly scanning her before returning to him. He outlined the plan in short, precise sentences. The objective was simple in theory, but layered with complexity in execution. They would navigate through thick terrain, under simulated fire, locate a hidden transmitter and extract it before the opposing force intercepted them. She would be responsible for Overwatch, providing long-range cover and making split-second calls on enemy positions. There would be no fixed firing line, no controlled targets, only the chaos of moving threats and the pressure of time running out. They moved out in a single file line, the forest swallowing them almost instantly. The early light slanted through the branches in thin beams that caught the faint swirl of dust and pollen stirred by their passing. The ground was uneven, littered with stones and fallen branches that threatened to twist an ankle with every step. The air was tense, the only sounds the low rustle of gear and the measured breathing of the team. Ahead, the seal raised a hand and the line froze. Her eyes scanned the area and caught the faintest glint of metal through the brush barely 100 meters out. The first pop of simulated gunfire cracked through, the trees sending the team diving for cover. She slid into position on a small rise, her rifle coming to her shoulder with practiced speed. Through the scope, she tracked the movement of the opposing force, two figures shifting between cover, advancing. On the left flank, she called out their position, her voice low but steady. The team adjusted immediately, her information allowing them to intercept before the threat could close. The exercise pressed on each engagement faster than the last. The terrain, working against them every step. The sun climbed higher, burning away the cool of morning and drawing sweat across her brow. Her breathing remained steady, her focus absolute. She spotted threats before they broke cover, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, giving the team the edge they needed to push forward. But the opposition was relentless, adapting quickly, forcing them to change course and maneuver through a narrow gully where visibility was almost non-existent. The gully walls rose steep and close, cutting off the wind and trapping heat until the air felt thick and heavy. They moved in near silence, every sense straining for the smallest sign of movement. Then it came a sudden burst of fire from the ridge above, spraying the path with dust and stone. She dropped to prone, sighted in, and fired 2 rapid shots, the targets disappearing behind cover, but not before she saw them stagger. The team surged forward, taking the opening. They reached the coordinates with minutes, to spare the hidden transmitter buried beneath a layer of leaves and debris. The SEAL retrieved it quickly and gave the signal to extract, but the opposing force was already closing in. The final stretch was a blur of motion and noise, the forest. Alive with shouts and gunfire. She held the rear, her shots precise, each one buying the team another few seconds of space until the tree line ahead broke open into the safety of the extraction zone. The moment they crossed the line, the simulated fire ceased, the sudden silence ringing in her ears. The SEAL turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment before a slow, approving nod broke across his face. He told her she had done more than hold her own. She had changed the pace of the entire mission with her eyes and her voice. She lowered her rifle, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep in her chest. This was no longer about a single impossible shot on a range. This was about every decision, every ounce of focus, every refusal. To quit when the odds closed in her journey from adjusting targets to standing shoulder to shoulder with the best had been forged in sweat strain and moments where failure had been a breath away. As the team dispersed, she stood quietly for a moment, watching the forest sway in the morning breeze, and she knew she had not just proven herself, she had claimed her place among them.